James Frederick Spears. Everybody knows me by Fred. Born in New Albany, Mississippi, December 12th, 1954, Shands Hospital. If I remember correctly, it was right downtown, not far from French's Flower Shop. I have 9 siblings. I have oldest brother was Jesse Harris and John Harris, Dorothy Harris, Janice Spears, Mary Spears, Willie Spears, Harry Spears, Richard, and my youngest sibling is Cecilia Spears. So it was quite a house full of us, I'll say that. Our grandparents stayed right down the street from us, and we had an aunt, Hattie Rucker, who stayed just a little further away from us on the same street. And we had another aunt, Vashti Bryson, who stayed in the same community, but she was like a street or so over from us on Church Street. Church Street was the community that I grew up in. It was about 5 minutes from B.F. Ford School. And I walked to school every day, rain or shine. We didn't have the luxury of Uber or taxis back then. So you can imagine on rainy days, we would have to don these little yellow slickers and boots, and all the kids would be walking up Baker Street to B.F. Ford. If I may, I can remember vividly, the first bell, I think, was at 8 o'clock. And if you weren't in place or in school by the second bell, which was 8:05, you were tardy, and you'd have to go and see a gentleman by the name of Mr. Hall. He was a short, bald-headed gentleman who was the enforcer of rules, so to speak. He was the principal at B.F. Ford Elementary. And naturally, at the end of the day, the bell was 3:15, and it was like pandemonium breaks loose when all the kids want to get out of the class from being in there all day. And primarily, I attended B.F. Ford from 1960 to 1966, and that was the first 6 years was elementary over there. If I may, I would like to give thanks to the Almighty God, my wife and family, and to all my friends in New Albany. And I'd like to thank the Union County Historical Society for allowing me to participate in this preservation of local history. As I was saying, the community I grew up in was only 5 minutes from B.F. Ford. And by the same token, I was 5 minutes from Central Middle School, which was right over the hill from my house there on Church Street. The community was a second family. Everyone knew each other. And if you got into trouble or had a problem with anyone in the community, everyone in the community knew it. It was a small town America feel to the neighborhood. Kids could be kids. You could leave your doors unlocked and probably be gone all day walking around the neighborhood, and no one would bother you, no problems. As we see today, I guess kids really can't play in the front yards or whatever without parents being visible. But back in those times, in the 60s, life was much easier. And kids could be primarily just be kids. No politics, no problems. Just mom, dad, your siblings. And I'd like to move on to say this, that every culture has specific ideas of how it should be perceived. And history is just a tool that should be used to teach further future generations what has occurred in the past. And sometimes the facts get lost or skewed and tell only one side of the story. And this is a golden opportunity for us local residents to have our inputs heard about memories and the life at B.F. Ford School. Primarily, I'd like to reflect back on my first grade year, and that would be 1960 at B.F. Ford. My first grade teacher was Mrs. C.E. Ford. That would be Mrs. Varnell Kimmons' mother. Super lady. She taught my mom, so I don't want to say that that makes her old, but she was an elderly lady by the time that I did have her for first grade. And I believe she had taught all of my siblings except for my youngest sister. So she had been around. She's a very loving, caring lady who guided us along in those first years. My second grade teacher at B.F. Ford was a lady named Mrs. Mary Bramlett. And she was there for maybe the beginning of the semester in 61, I believe. And I believe she fell ill, and they brought in a teacher to replace her by the name of Mrs. Mary Spikes. And primarily, I can remember from the first grade, we were doing redback reader type reading, See Spot Run, learning your ABCs, just the general stuff that kids learn in the first grade. And in the second year, seemed like we moved on to addition and subtraction. And third grade year, I had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Ruth Hill. And vividly, I can remember her drilling us on the multiplication tables. And I just always had problems trying to remember that whole multiplication table from the ones all the way to the 12s. It just kind of got away from me when it got around the 8s and 9s. And she was very strict. Fourth grade teacher at Ford was Mrs. Frances Graham. And primarily, I can remember health study in her class. Seemed like she was always telling us to wash our hands and be clean, and cleanliness she stressed very much. Fifth grade year was a teacher by the name of Mrs. Lola Grice. And very nice, pleasant lady. She attended the same church I did, which was Watson Grove MB Church up on 78 Highway. And she was our primary social study teacher. And in sixth grade year, Miss Geneva Wade. And she was big on English, writing, and reading, and composition type study. She taught me all the vowels, the A-E-I-O-U stuff. Later on, I come to realize how important that was. And the vivid memories from first grade with Miss Ford teaching us to write our ABCs and how to read from the old redback readers, See Spot Run type stuff. That was my first reading experience that was fun and encouraged me to read more. I'd like to acknowledge that those first 6 years were very helpful, enlightening, and encouraged me to move on. At the time, it seemed like there was nothing going on except what was being said in the school at that time. There were no outside forces. I mean, you were being a kid, you went to school, you listened to your teachers, they led you, and what they said was gospel. I can't really remember any real discipline uh, that had to be enforced. Every now and then you would have a kid who would go outside of themselves and would have to be paddled. Now, that was the corporal punishment part of it that I don't think they allow now in these schools, but at BF4, they did have corporal punishment. I'd just like to say that. Um, insofar as recreation, the basketball games were big. We always had competition with schools like Ripley, and I believe Oxford, maybe Aberdeen, Olive Branch. Those were the schools that I can remember that always would come to New Albany and play us very, very hard. Those teams, some of the guys probably were NBA material, but never got the chance to progress on. Uh, you look at the Dr. J's and all these guys making all the money now. I'm sure that some of those guys in New Albany had the same skill set and talent that could have moved on, but in the times we were in, it just didn't happen for them. I believe B.F. Ford was a catalyst for the Black community to prepare kids and move them forward. Of course, at the time, I didn't approach it that way, and I'm sure most of the kids who were going to school then didn't really see how important school was. And for B.F. Ford to be there in those times really was a blessing. The school had kids from all the outer communities like Ingomar, Myrtle, Red Hill, Blue Springs, Waterville, the town of, I believe, Pumpkin Center, up around Cotton Plant, going toward Ripley. Kids came from like 6 or 7 different communities to go to B.F. Ford. It was quite a big gathering of kids. I would say anywhere from 300 to 400 kids, maybe. I don't know if it was that many, but kids came from far and wide, and that really amazed me. Kids lived out in the countries and on the farms, and sometimes in the fall you would see kids who would start school, but by, I guess, crop gathering time or whatever they did out in fields, several of the kids would disappear. You wouldn't see them. I guess they had to help their fathers gather crops, and you wouldn't see them again, if you saw them at all, maybe until the next year. And I didn't come to realize that's the way it was, that I didn't see my friends for months on end. But that was kind of the way it was in the 60s, when the kids would come in the fall early. I think it was September we'd start school, and by, I guess, October, November, you didn't see them anymore. Well, now, that's not to say that all the kids, but several families existed that way. Insofar as day-to-day operations of the school, as I can remember, we didn't have lockers. We had books that were present in the school rooms themselves, and we didn't really take books home, as I can remember, for the first, second, third, or fourth year. The kids would have to share books, maybe 1 or 2 kids to a book. Some were in good shape, some were not. Some the backs were torn, written pages torn out, some of them. Um, that's not to say that we didn't learn. Uh, we still learn. I mean, even in subsistent conditions, I would say. Uh, but it wasn't all bad. I mean, teachers kept our interest up, to say the least. Um, I'm going to move on to the year 1966, if I may. In the fall of 1966, this was the transition year from B.F. Ford to school choice in the New Albany school system. um, School choice, meaning you could choose to go to any school that was in your neighborhood at the time. I had no idea what was going on with that. My mom, I think she, among some of her community development um, meeting folks, I think that was the name of the club there in New Albany, New Albany Community Development Club. They got together and figured what kids or whose kids from the community would transition and go to Central Junior High. And I was one of the 5 or 6 kids that was chosen to go from B.F. Ford, an all Black environment, to Central Middle School, an all white environment, which was quite a shock. Um, but either way, it was 5 minutes from B.F. Ford and it was 5 minutes to Central Middle School. So mom, she went ahead and chose to send me to Central Middle School. Little did I know the shock I was going to encounter when I got there. Oh boy, I went from one complete setting to another complete setting. A bit of a shock to a 12-year-old kid. And I remember the first day uh, transitioning to Central. Um, all the kids had to gather in the auditorium, and my mom and I, we walked into the auditorium. She was with me, and we walked in, sat at the front of the auditorium, and there were about 5 or 6 other kids with their moms and family there. And remarkably, there were no incidents or, I would say, strife or trouble. We heard a few cat calls here and there, but that's to be expected. We were prompted to be ready for that, but nothing really occurred. It was a smooth transition from the first day into the second day and thereon. I have to give credit to the principal, Mr. Freeman. He had actually pulled me to the side and spoke to me and said that if I had any problems with anything that was going on in the school, to let him know first. Um, and from there, he took me down to my homeroom teacher, who was Coach Bobby Bingham. He was a football coach for, I guess it was the JV, the varsity team there at Central. And he was a great man. He helped me a lot. He oriented me to the classes I needed to attend and how to get to them. At Ford, we didn't transition from class to class each hour, which was quite a shock for me when I went to Central. New environment, big school, 500-600 kids. Trying to just find your way and navigate was quite a task. And just learning where your your classes were, and how to get up the stairs and around, and finding your way was quite a task. But I did eventually make friends, and those guys really helped me out. um, Larry Staten, Jerry Fortune, Will Carlthorpe, all those guys. I got to be friends with those guys early on. And Steve Bramlett, just to name a few. But eventually we became friends in the seventh, eighth grade and moved on, graduated together, did PE together. That was the greatest experience, I think, for me, was to actually go to gym class and demonstrate my little prowess at basketball or kickball or dodgeball with fellas. Uh, that was, I think that was the bonding part there where kids could actually come together and bond and move on to the academic part of learning. But my friends, the friends that I come to know through those years, primarily were made in gym class, and I moved on from there. Um, I must say this: the school transitioning from BF Ford, which had limited opportunity in the sense that we didn't have, like in science class, labs that had Bunsen burners and beakers and actual a science lab class. I mean, we in that area, BF Ford was lacking. I just must say that. Great teachers, great environment, nurturing, caring, but to transition to Central and that environment in the early 60s, it really opened my eyes to see how much the school in and of itself was lacking and behind. Because I think as far as I went at BF Ford in math was long division. And when I got to Central, the kids had already taken Algebra 1, and some were even in Algebra 2. So I must say this, that I had no idea what A plus B equals C. None of that correlated with me at all. Just hadn't seen it, knew nothing about it, polynomials, that kind of stuff. So the transition to go to the different environment really helped me a lot. Opened my eyes to a lot of things. Um, having said that, I must say that BF Ford um, and what they did accomplish with what they had was a great thing. Um, I can't say that I had any real bad experiences there. Um, all the teachers that, as I can recall, were great people. Uh, the biggest thing about being there was that everyone in the neighborhood you knew pretty much. Miss Kimmons being the librarian, I can remember her vividly. She was a very disciplinarian. You had to be quiet. uh, and now I'm thinking of, as I can recall, kids could go home at lunch for 30 minutes, I believe, at 12 o'clock. You could go home if you could walk home and get back within the 30-minute period. And I would walk home for lunch every day. That was a great experience for me, being able to walk home and get my peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a glass of Kool-Aid or something and run back to school. And of course, a lot of the kids were able to afford school lunch. I think they were about 10 or 15 cents back then. And several kids did that. Kids actually brought their lunches. They were allowed to bring sack lunches or little lunch pails. And a lot of the kids did that. Um, they sold, as I recall, sandwiches, the upperclassmen in like 10th, well, I believe 11th and 12th grade. They walked around and sold sandwiches and milk. And I believe they were preparing to go on senior trips that the school did back in the 60s. They would go to Washington, D.C. and Lookout Mountain in Tennessee and Fat Man Squeeze over in Chattanooga and places like that. But that was part of the experience of being at B.F. Ford. Um, I remember Coach Kennedy vividly. He um, he was quite an influence on the kids there. He pretty much kept the kids in line, to say the least. I won't elaborate on some of the things that that actually happened, but let's just say he was a force to be dealt with if you got out of line. Okay. um, During the cold, I would say cold months of the year, I can remember the old powerhouse that Mr. Burt Ratliff used to tend to. There would be times when the heat would kind of go out in the school, and Mr. Burt, I can remember Burt Ratliff, he would have to go out and repower up the old furnace and get the school back warm again, because often you'd walk into school and be cold in there. Simple things like that stick in my head, I guess, because of you'd leave a warm house and go to school, and sometimes school would be cold. So I just remembered that, and um, I guess with that's pretty much my memories of B.F. Ford and transitioning over to Central Middle School. And like I said, in '68, we went from Central Middle to W.P. Daniel, and I graduated in the class of 1972. And from there, went on to military service, and from there to the FAA, and from there to St. Luke's Hospital as a systems analyst. So my experience has been one that started at BF Ford. It helped me along through life. As I said, first grade through sixth, the foundation was laid, and it definitely helped me in life to get to the point I am now. And I'm very grateful for having to have been attended there. Early on, she told me that she knew B.F. Ford had shortcomings in the areas of like school books. She knew that the books that the kids had were substandard, and she told me that my dad and she had discussed the kids going on to college, and no one in the family had went to college at that point. Um, so she told me to be prepared to move on to college, that I would need a better preparation. And she felt like, since this opportunity was opening up about going to an integrated school system, that it would be better to start now. And I didn't have any say in it. I mean, she had made her mind up that I was going. Uh, I don't know the politics of it, but at some point, myself and I believe 5 other kids chose to go, and we were there. And quite interesting to go from one setting to the other setting. Um, to show you how vivid my imagination is, I always remember some of my Caucasian friend saying my cowlick, and I had no idea what a cowlick was. And finally, I think one of the kids named Mike Mills, he said, "You don't know what a cowlick is?" I said, "What? Something that the cows lick?" He said, "No, my hair in the back sticks up." So I said, "Oh, that's a cowlick." So little cultural things like that opened my eyes, and it just stands out in my mind that things like that we were unaware of where I come from, that you know it was common to them, and I'm sure some of the things that I'd done or said was equally as weird to them. I'm the ninth child. I have a younger sibling, sister Cecilia, and a lot of hand me down. I don't know if you remember Fred's Dollar Store on the backside of New Albany. Uh, we did a lot of shopping in there. In fact, I think half of New Albany spent a lot of time in Fred's Dollar Store. Of course, the Sappington and Van Atkins were the pricey kind of places that you only went to get brand new shoes or something for your mom. We didn't shop there, but it was quite a Leave It to Beaver type environment. And New Albany, in and of itself, fair and friendly city, I think is their motto. It fits it very well. Uh, the time that I came through there, the people in and of themselves, as I can recall, were friendly. I didn't hear any cat calls. I mean, I'm sure there was a name calling here and there, but if you were downtown, things were cordial. I mean, you didn't have to jump off the sidewalk if somebody came along, as you see in a lot of the footage that you see about the South, and that kind of irritates me that they show it like that all the time and make people believe that that was the only way and the only thing that was going on in the South at that time. Uh, Maybe it was in some places, but New Albany seems to have got it together somehow. It was a working town, religious town, uh, church family. Uh, you worked, you went to school, you abided by the rule. Uh, you knew where your kids were. I'll put it like that. Uh, I don't know. I don't know if people can remember. There was a klaxon that sounded here, correction, in New Albany at 12 o'clock every night. There's a loud horn that went off at midnight. And if you weren't where you needed to be or headed where you needed to be, uh, to put it gently, someone would move you along where you needed to go. Uh, None of that hanging out, riding around all night. I guess the city now has grown to the point where it's much more of a big city environment down there now. I've been back several times throughout the years. New Albany has grown. That's great. Uh, it's more diverse from what I've seen when I come back. That's good. Um, the schools, I guess they're doing just really great, super great. Um, I see the baseball fields and the new stores and everything growing. The town is just booming. If you were there in the 60s and 50s and before that, you would have never imagined what you see in New Albany now being what it is. It's just mind blowing to anyone who was there prior to, let's say, 2000s. Um, the races, I know that's always a question in everybody's mind because of the Mississippi thing. Um, I can't recall any problems ever flaring, any glaring issues that came up. I mean, the times were what they were. Um, and I believe the schools reinforced that as time comes along, change will come. And I believe what it was that my mom's generation knew that change would come, maybe slow, not as fast as a lot of folks wanted it to be, but they had their pulse on what was going on, and they understood that you don't make change overnight, especially big changes such as the schools. Uh, you don't change that in the wink of an eye. Say it like that. And mom had foresight and vision, and I believe that only comes through her experiences in life. And my dad, he passed when I was 8 years old, but she told me that they had actually discussed, you know, when the time comes for school choice for me to actually attend Central. So the opportunity presented itself, and she jumped on it, and I moved on. Mom was actually, I believe, born in New Albany, and her name was Mary Lou Bryson, originally from the Union County area. My dad, he was born in Ripley, Mississippi, and his name was Willie Lawrence Spears. And I can't recall the year they got married, but I think it was right after the war because he was a veteran, and he came home, I guess, right after the war, and they got married there. Oh, I guess in the late 40s or somewhere along in there. And his family was from the Tippah County area. Mom's family, Union County, and I believe some of the folks on her side came from Alcorn County. I believe that's Corinth, and over around Tishomingo, or from that area. So kind of a blended family there. You know, he never ventured very far from New Albany. In fact, I don't believe I ever went to even Memphis until I was a teenager, and that was just a brief little over there and get whatever we needed to get and come right back home. It was not a it was not an adventure type thing. We didn't go visit very far. You went to Tupelo to get everything. Everything was Lee County. You went to Tupelo to shop primarily a lot. The old Hardin's Bakery was down there. We went down there to get bread and rolls and things of that nature from the thrift store in Tupelo. They put up it was a big mall built down there in like 65 or 66 that everyone went to and did a lot of shopping in Tupelo. And it was up and down old 78, the old 2-lane road. Which lost a lot of people on that road, wrecks going up and down the highway. But primarily we were right there local. We'd go to Ecru, Pontoc once in a while, but Ripley, New Albany, Oxford, local. That's as far as we ever really ventured out to. Um, we always were amazed when kids or somebody came from distant places like Chicago, St. Louis, or oh my God, if you came from New York, it was like a alien had landed. You know, who are those people? Why, you know, we were just local yokel type people, you know. Um, didn't intermingle with a whole lot of folks that weren't from the community. I'll say it like that. After he transitioned from veteran status, he was hired at Union Lumber Company. At, that's north of town over there off of Peterson or somewhere over, not too far from the old Federal Compress was Union Lumber Company. And I believe Mr. Carl Stevens owned that back then. And he worked there until he passed in 1963, primarily as a truck driver, delivery type guy. Um, he did carpentry somewhat. He served in the Army during World War II, went to the Philippines. Uh, he was in the Philippine Liberation Campaign. As far as I know, he wasn't wounded, but he served honorably. Yes, he was in the Philippine Liberation Campaign. Uh, I think that was 42 or 3. And he served honorably, came home, and resumed his life after that. Mom, she was a beautician. She went to a cosmetology school up in Ripley called Foster's Enterprises or Foster's Beauty College. And she got her cosmetology license, and she did hair. I don't think they had facials and nails done back then, but primarily did hair. Um, the community in and of itself had about 5 beauty shops. I mean, within that Church Street span, it was Miss Hazel Simmons, Miss Woodruff, Miss Elsie, Miss Bryson, uh, Miss Wade, Nora May Wade. It was about 5 or 6 beauty salons on Church Street. So several uh, families always, you know, in and out all the time, all during the day, getting their hair done. So you met people like that, and everybody knew everybody. That was my remembrance of that. We had one little store right up the street from my house called Booze Store. Miss Artie Mae Booze owned it, and it was the store where you ran to get your little cookies and candy and your uh, uh, apples and oranges and things that you could buy for like 2 or 3 cents. I mean, a penny meant a lot. If you found a penny, you picked it up. Not like today where you kind of look at a penny and say, oh, well, walk over it. Not back then. We sold bottles, pop bottles. You walk around picking up pop bottles to take them up to, there was a little grocery store up on 78 called Meadows Grocery. Bill Meadows owned it. It was across from the Baptist church. And we would gather up our pop bottles that we had found that day and go up and get us about 6 or 7 cents. Go down to Miss Artie Mae Booze's store and get cookies and donuts or whatever, and satisfy our sweet tooth. And that's what we did. Outside of playing baseball all day, but that was the 2 primary neighborhood stores. And then if you went over on Baker Street where B.F. Ford was, I believe they've told you about Howard's snack bar that was there right over from the school where all the kids would gather on the evenings and on Sundays to eat ice cream and stand around and gather. That was the gathering spot for the neighborhood. You could actually listen to records and meet other kids and carry on. That was the gathering spot for that neighborhood. Was Mrs. Howard's snack bar. We worked on cars, uh, trying to put old cars together. I hung around with my brother-in-law a lot, older gentleman by the name of Charlie Woodruff Jr. He was what you call a gas head, or Well, he was a very good mechanic, and he kept my interest. We built cars, uh, primarily went to movies, the old Magnolia Theater, as I recall. We did that a lot. Movies, building cars, just hanging out, kind of at each other's houses. And along during that time, um, the park down the hill from the school was open, and it had a swimming pool. So we did do a lot of swimming in the summertime, and there was the basketball and baseball courts down there. So we did that a lot. Um, Primarily in the summertime, that's where everybody hung out at. It was down in the parks, and another gathering spot. That's where all the kids would go. Uh, Pretty much that was it. I mean, you did a lot of walking. I know that nobody had cars. So, well, I actually worked for the summer of '72 at a company called Masterbuilt. Masterbuilt was up on Highway 15, and I worked there for some months, and I went to Futorian. It was a furniture manufacturing place where I guess probably 50% of the folks in New Albany worked at one time or another. I left Masterbuilt and went to Futorian. Worked there for another year maybe, and in '73 I joined the Air Force. Stayed in the Air Force from '73 to 1977, and got an honorable discharge from the Air Force in '77. Went to the FAA as an air traffic controller, and stayed there till 1981 during the Patco strike. That was when all the air traffic controllers went on strike that year. Uh, and that ended my career in government. And from there, I had to go back and retool, went back to school where BF Ford kicks in again, and used the GI Bill to get a degree in computer science. And I used that to become a systems analyst, and retired from one of the hospitals here in Kansas City as an analyst at 62. I have a nephew who stays in St. Louis, one of my sister's sons, Walter Barnes, and his family, and we visit quite often. Um, have another nephew in Atlanta, Georgia, and a niece there. Um, Trying to think, there's so many of us. And I do have family now in New Albany, nieces and niece, and several of her offspring are here in Kansas City. And one young lady just moved back to Horn Lake. I have a daughter, Jasmine, a daughter, Stephanie, a daughter, Keela, and they're all grown and gone. Jasmine's a millennial. Steph, uh, she's 34 at this point. And my oldest daughter, Fakila, she's 40-ish. I'll just say 40-ish. Put her real age out there.
Is your mom still living?
No, she passed in 1997, January 17. Never forget the day. She had CAD, coronary artery disease, that they tried to correct down at Northeast Mississippi Medical Center. And she actually passed in surgery that morning. Quite a blow. Still miss her. talk to her every day. So she's still with me. I have to say this, that even the ladies in the community in and of itself kind of directed us and guided us and helped us with that. Because as a kid, you really don't see what they're trying to actually tell you or direct you to. They were always reinforcing that you need to do this, you need to do that, kind of pushing you along, guiding you along, stay out of trouble, do right, uh, go to church, all the things that make you be a good, solid citizen. I'll say, um, if I may, I'd like to just acknowledge a couple of them: Miss Rosalie Estes, Miss Luella Ezel, Miss Hazel Simmons, Hazel Leeper, Miss Virginia Elsie, and in particular, uh, I'd have to say Miss Geneva Wade was my true inspiration to get me motivated. Uh, they kept me on the straight and narrow, and I wound up here. But everybody I knew and came along with, you had a church home. We had three primary churches in the neighborhood. My church was Watson Grove. Then there was Melaloo, which is right up the street from Central School. There was Hall's Chapel. That's on Baker. And on over was the Kojic, the Church of God in Christ. That's over on, I believe that's Baker. Yeah, right over from where Howard's Hotel was. So you had like four different churches right within a walking area that we attended. Of course, you always went where your parents went. I mean, that's kind of the way it was. And from time to time, we would visit the different churches in the neighborhood. And that was an eye opener to see how other denominations, I'll say, we being Baptist and then the Methodist and the Kojic folks, just to see how they did their services versus what we did. And I said, well, why did they do that? And how come we don't do that? And, some had the little tambourines in them, and we didn't do that. So it was really a shock to go to some of these places and say, boy, they're different, So, but everybody went to church. I mean, Sunday morning you were in church at 9, and you didn't get out to noon, and especially on the days when they had the big preaching going on, you had to stay till preacher was done. You didn't get up and walk out. You went to church, you stayed in church, and then you came home and ate a big meal. James Fred. So everybody down there would know me by Fred. I did go to Northeast, I believe, the vocational side of the school. I didn't go academic. I went vocational for carpentry for I think a semester or two. Didn't finish that. And that's when I went and got the jobs, went to work at Masterbuilt, and just decided I'm going to just work. And saw that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I said, well, you're not college material at this point, so you've got to do something with your life. And Mom and I sat down, we talked about it, and she said, well, you have an alternative. You can go in the military. The only thing about that at that point, Vietnam had just come to they were still fighting, and everybody was afraid of Vietnam. Even during the time when I was at BF Ford and during the time at Central, Vietnam was just always in your thoughts that you didn't want to go over there. I mean, and that's why a lot of kids tried to go to college, weren't able to go, or didn't have the finances to go, and they were drafted. So that was one of the reasons that I went Air Force rather than going into the Army. Uh, I didn't. I tried to stay out of Vietnam, uh, but in our senior year, I think they started to wind it down in '72. They started bringing the troops back. So I made up my mind at that time, well, you better go ahead and get your military obligation out of the way so that when the next war comes along, you'll already have that done and it won't be your turn. So that's what I did. Great experience, I might want to add. Got to see a lot, moved around a lot of interested people, and it taught me discipline, structure, and I'll say it like this: it taught me respect, a lot of respect. I learned that in there. I mean, it's not that I didn't get it before, but let's say it was reinforced. Oh, and I want to acknowledge a couple of people from that time period also. Mrs. Newt Ivy, the librarian for W.P. Daniel for years. Great lady, great lady. In spite of separation of church and state, she always had prayer in the library every morning that you would be quiet while she read from her daily bread uh, book, and then we'd go on from there. But Miss Ivy, she inspired me a lot. And Miss Gwendolyn Pennybaker, she was my math teacher who told me, James, no matter don't it was this thing about I couldn't get something done in her class, and she said, well, don't let it like weigh on you so that you don't pick yourself up and move on. This is just one incident. Let's inspire yourself to move on. So Miss Pennebaker kind of pushed me along too. Lawyer Hugh Clayton and his wife Miss Rose Clayton, her daughter married Senator Cochran, and they used to have these big ginormous parties over there off of Shan Hill. I guess you know where the Shan's mansion used to be up there. Well, the Claytons had a house right up in that same area that I would go over and rake their yard and trim the bushes and flowers. And she was such a nice lady. Oh, I tell you, she was an inspiration. And I just remember them setting up for these big, huge barbecues they would have over there, and barbecued goats and all kind of stuff over there. Big parties. Fascinated me. I, little kid, over there working, and that was just another good part of growing up in New Albany. Les, Donnie Province, Doug Embry, and maybe one or two other fellas had formed a band called Up in Smoke, and that was in the '70s. They actually played over at the auditorium at W.P. Daniel, and that was doing the, like I said, color my world kind of rock and roll stuff that was going on then. But yeah, Dunny, Province, Leslie, Doug Embry, and I can't think of the other fellows. There's about two or three that I can recall. But they formed a band there and performed in the school. Sure did. And naturally, I guess everybody remembers the Sam Mosley and Sam and Bob, or Sam Bobby Johnson, I believe. Back in those days, that was a great band. We used to listen to them a lot. We listened to those guys practice a lot and hung around listening to them when they were rehearsing over at Sam Mosley's house or up at the gym. So a friend of mine that I grew up with, he had a musical ear, and I used to tag along with him. He knew Sam, or actually, he was Sam's cousin, James Cole, and we would go over and listen to them a lot. And that was one of the bigger things that we did. Sam's house was over on the north side of town, Second Street or somewhere over in there. Uh, Not very far from what would be, I guess, Stokes Grocery over in that area on the north side of town. We would go over there, and he would be, strumming his guitar and tuning it, and a couple of other bandmates would be over there with the horns and guitars, and it just fascinated me. I never could play a lick, but I did enjoy watching them and listening to them. Yeah. The first black cop policeman that was there, Mr. Clarence Estes. Now, anybody who ever sees this will remember that, but he was one of the true inspirations for me also. He used to talk to us and tell us about, staying out of trouble, get home, you need to do better, make sure you're, straight and narrow. And he stayed right around from Sam Mosley. He was on that north side over there. And I went to school with one of his daughters, Sharon. And he was just a great, great man, brave man. I'll say it that way. He passed in the 80s. He was about my dad's generation. He came out of the war, and he was the first black policeman. I remember it was 64, I think, when he joined the police force. And it just amazed me that we actually had a black man wearing a gun, a policeman, walking around New Albany. And it kind of opened my eyes again. I said, boy, what's going on around here? Limited police powers back then, but he was there as a symbol. And he patrolled, and in the mornings when we would walk to school right over the hill there from on Baker Street, he would be there to direct traffic and keep the kids, safe. And every now and then he would come in and actually talk to us in school. In the mornings, he would come in, talk about one thing or another. And I look back at it now and I said that was courage and bravery under fire, because I don't know how he did it, but he did it. And later on, you had they call him Trigger Elsie. He was the second black policeman, and they rode together. But for years, it was only Clarence Estes. And for the first 2 or 3 years, it was him by himself patrolling New Albany at night. He's primarily a night shift guy, and he kind of kept the lid on things.